Ancient tradition maintains that the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. But the shroud is enigmatic for these reasons. The shroud has been carbon dated to the Middle Ages, but it cannot be duplicated using Middle Age technology. This presentation will briefly look at the shroud, the man in the shroud, the image on the shroud, the history of the shroud. I'm Kathy Clapper, a retired nurse and a songwriter. GC Veritas is the apologetic outreach of Ginger Creek Community Church. The shroud. The shroud has been described this way, quote, "No one can explain, let alone replicate it. It looks like a smudge on a bit of old cloth, but it is a negative 3D high-resolution image made from the tiny discolored fibers of a cloth covered in blood, along with an image of a body stiff with rigor mortis. It measures about 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. It's a sepia-colored linen cloth, a burial cloth, with a faint image of a man who was beaten, crucified, and stabbed. It's the most studied artifact of history. The cloth is made from flax. Flax has been woven into cloth for 9,000 years. Insects avoid it because of its hardness. When it's boiled or bleached, flax has a high resistance to bacteria. Where did the cloth originate? The flax fibers are twisted together in a clockwise Z twist. Egyptians favored S twist yarns. So it's unlikely the cloth came from Egypt. The banding on the linen suggests that the yarn was bleached first, then woven. However, medieval European linen was woven first, then bleached. They laid their cloth out in the fields, exposing it to sunlight, and bleach was poured over it. The linen was woven on an oversized loom. An oversized loom was rare in France in Middle Ages, but common in the Middle East in the 1st century. In fact, Galilee was an important manufacturing center for linen. On the right is a close-up of the cloth. It's woven in a 3/1 herringbone weave. The weft thread, horizontal on the loom, passes over 3 warp threads, which are vertical on the loom, then under 1 and over 3. The next weft or row is offset by 1. In addition to the image, there are bloodstains on the shroud. The blood is human blood, male, type AB, determined by chemical testing. The blood was on the shroud first. It soaked through the entire thickness of the cloth. Then the body image came second. It has a double body image, top and bottom, but no sides. The body would have been laid on the left side of the shroud, head toward the center and face up. The right side would have been folded over the top of the body. The shroud was burned in a church fire in 1532, resulting in scorch marks and water stains. The badly damaged areas were patched in 1534. There is pollen on the shroud unique to the area around Jerusalem, pollen from a plant with long thorns. Near the feet are particles of dirt and microscopic chips of limestone, closely matching limestone in Jerusalem. There are fold lines in the shroud. There's a 3-inch wide strip sewn on the shroud. The strip was sewn on with a stitch that was unknown in the Middle Ages, but was used by the Essenes before the end of the 1st century. There are 4 sets of 4 L-shaped burn holes in the fabric of the shroud. Here's a 17th century painting depicting how the artist thought Jesus was laid in the shroud. How does the shroud compare to burial practices of the Jews in Jesus' time? Based on the code of Jewish law, the Mishnah, and burials by the Essene community, a burial like that of the man in the shroud was practiced by Jews in Jesus' time, but it is uncertain how common this was. A cloth was placed around the head at the time of death and set aside after the body was covered. A single, plain, large sheet of linen served as a burial cloth. A strip of linen was torn off the long edge. The body was laid on one half of the cloth. A folded napkin or chin band was wrapped around the head to keep the jaw closed during the onset of rigor mortis. The wrists and legs were bound. The other half of the cloth was folded over the body. The torn-off strip was wrapped around the shroud-covered body and tied, securing the body. According to Jewish law, the body was to be washed before burial. But if the person was killed by the state, the body was not to be washed. Blood was to remain on the body as a payment for a person's acts against the state. In May 1898, Italian photographer Secondo Pio photographed the shroud. His photograph showed a negative image. His photograph was dismissed as a fraud. 33 years later, professional photographer Jesper Henry photographed the shroud. His photograph also showed a negative image, and interest in the shroud grew. 45 years after that, in 1976, a group of scientists were using a VP8 analyzer at Sandia Laboratories to evaluate X-rays. The analyzer converts image density into typographical relief. When applied to normal photographs, the result is a distorted and inaccurate image. However, when it was applied to the shroud, the result was an accurate topographical image showing the correct natural relief characteristics of a human form. These results are often referred to as three-dimensional, as shown on this web page. The ventral image as it appears on the screen of a VP8 image analyzer. Raising and lowering the VP8 gain control. The topographical relief shows how far the cloth was from the body when the image was created. Features that lie closest to the cloth, nose, forehead, cheeks, hands, are the most intense, while areas of the body that are farther away leave a lighter impression. Two of the researchers viewing the VP8 image of the shroud formed a research team to investigate how the image was formed. Within a few months, the Shroud of Turin research project, STURP, was born. 2 years later, they performed the first ever in-depth scientific examination of the Shroud of Turin. In 1978, scientists, biophysicists, optical physicists, forensic pathologists from the Los Alamos National Laboratory and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, plus photographers and electrical power experts, flew from the US to Turin, Italy. The 26-member team was given 5 straight days to measure the shroud and figure out how the image was formed. They brought several tons of equipment and scientific instruments. For 5 straight days, 24 hours a day, they did hands-on, non-destructive testing. They were supervised by European scientists. They issued their final report in 1981, quote, "We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form, of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved." Then in 1988, a small piece the size of a postage stamp was clipped off the corner of the shroud. The small blue rectangle is approximately where the tiny piece came from. This tiny piece was divided into 3 pieces and sent to 3 independent laboratories for carbon-14 testing. The tests showed that the flax fibers from the shroud had grown in a 130-year period between 1260 AD and 1390 AD. with 95% confidence. If the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ, how did the carbon dating get it wrong? Proposed ideas on how the carbon dating got it wrong. The samples was contaminated. A younger patch was woven into the sample. The shroud samples were switched with medieval linen. Carbon monoxide in the atmosphere skewed the results. Raymond Rogers, American chemist and leading expert in thermal analysis, known for his work on the shroud, believed a cotton patch had been expertly woven into the linen fibers and then dyed to match the color of the linen. The repair was undetected. The sample for dating was taken from the repaired area. Robert Rucker, with a BS and MS in nuclear and engineering, believes the body emitted radiation, shifting the carbon date from 30 AD to 1260 AD. If the body emitted a microburst of radiation, some of it would have been absorbed by nitrogen-14 in the shroud, producing carbon-14 atoms. To shift the carbon date from 30 AD to 1260 AD requires only a 16% increase in the number of carbon-14 atoms. Since there are no side images on the shroud, Rucker believes the radiation must have been vertical, up and down. The average dates from 2 of the 3 labs are statistically different from each other at the sigma level. So, 3 researchers from Italy obtained and reviewed the original 1988 carbon-14 data. In an April 2018 paper in the prestigious journal Archaeometry, the authors wrote, quote, "Based on the statistical results, we question the level of confidence of 95% attributed to the AD 1260 to 1390 calendar age range," end quote. However, they cautioned, quote, "Our statistical results do not imply that the medieval hypothesis of the age of the tested sample should be ruled out." Then, in the April 11, 2022 edition of the open access peer-reviewed journal Heritage, scientists reported using wide-angle X-ray scattering to date the shroud. The dating method looks at the natural aging of the cellulose in the linen. They had a thread from the feet area of the frontal image. They compared it with a linen sample that is known to be from 55 to 74 AD. Their conclusion, quote, "The Shroud of Turin is a relic of about 20 centuries old," end quote. But the date is based on the following assumptions. For 2,000 years, the shroud has been kept at an average temperature of 22.5 plus or minus 0.5 degrees centigrade, and an average humidity of 55 plus or 5 plus or minus 5%. The man, crucified and dead. The man has 5 major wounds associated with death by crucifixion. There are puncture wounds through both wrists and through the tops of both feet. The man was pierced in the right side of the chest, from which there flowed a large amount of blood, mixed with a watery fluid. The man was dead when placed in the shroud. The body is clearly in a state of rigor mortis. The wounds can be identified as pre or post-mortem. Pre-mortem wounds include puncture wounds on the scalp, whipping, 4-nail wounds. The post-mortem wound, the chest. The shroud is consistent with Jesus' crucifixion. Feet, 2 nails through 1 foot, 1 of them through both feet. Side, bloodstain and clear serum from a wound in the side. When the body was moved, the serum flowed across the back to the other side. Back and legs, there are between 100 and 200 dumbbell-shaped whipping wounds on every area of the body except the face, forearms, and feet. A Roman flagrum has 3 leather thongs, each with a metal piece on the end. 40 or more lashes with a Roman flagrum would match these wounds. Shoulders. The man was whipped before carrying a rough object. The abrasions on the shoulder blades smeared the bloody wounds of the whipping underneath. Scalp. There are puncture wounds from sharp objects that pierced the scalp. Face. Large bruises on the cheeks and forehead, a twisted nose, one eye swollen half shut, and a cut upper lip. The front, top, and bottom teeth are visible. Dirt on abrasions on the tip of the nose, consistent with falling. There is a retraction of the beard and hair, where a chin band would have been tied. The side wound shows a hole the size of a Roman thrusting spear. Blood running down the arms at the correct angles for crucifixion. The blood has a high bilirubin content and nanoparticles of creatinine bound for ferritin, indicating the man had been severely tortured. Wrist and thumbs, nail holes in the wrists. Thumbs are not visible. When the median nerve in the wrist is hit, the thumbs retract into the palm. The fingers look too long, but if you x-ray the whole hand, you get an image similar to the hands on the shroud. Knees. Contusions on both knees. The man had fallen. There is dirt in the abrasions on one knee. The body was not unwrapped. Blood from the body would have stuck to the shroud. There is no evidence that the shroud was pulled away from the body. Blood clots are not smeared or broken. Borders of blood stains are intact. There is no decomposition on the shroud. The body did not remain in the cloth for more than a very few days. In a Middle Eastern environment in Jesus' time, a significant amount of bodily decomposition would occur even after 4 days. The image has been studied by artists and scientists. There are 52 documented occasions where artists viewed the shroud, created a replica of it, and were allowed to lay artwork on the cloth. In addition, ancient coins, icons, and mosaics duplicate the face on the shroud. Extensive scientific testing was done by STURP. This book, Byzantine Coins Influenced by the Shroud of Turin, has a tiny coin pictured on the cover. It's one of many such coins. Some of the coins say something like King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Giulio Fanti's book is rather pricey. It's available for about $170 at cokesbury.com. Notice how closely the coin resembles the image on the shroud. The coin is a Byzantine Empire gold coin dated between 685 to 695 AD. This coin is known as First Reign, the first portrait of Christ on a coin. 2 are available for purchase at finestknown.com. You can buy one for $11,250. Using an image overlay technique, you can compare the coin with the face on the shroud. The coin and the face have 65 points of congruence, including hair parted in the middle, hair behind one shoulder and in front of the other shoulder, length of beard, double-peaked beard. A rough analogy, in a court of law, 14 points of congruence are needed to identify fingerprints. This is the oldest known icon of Jesus. It's the Christ Pantocrator of St. Catherine's Monastery at Sinai. It dates from the 6th century. The icon and the face have 45 points of congruence. This mosaic is from a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the 11th century church just outside of Athens. The church has mosaics on its walls and domes. The mosaics of Daphne are thought to date from the Komnenian dynasty, when a Byzantine Greek noble family ruled the Byzantine Empire from 1081 to 1185 in what is now modern-day Turkey. Notice how closely the mosaic resembles the shroud. The image has been studied by scientists. Among the methods STURP used to gather data were direct microscopy, infrared spectrometry, X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, X-ray radiography, thermography, ultraviolet fluorescent spectrometry. Photographs were taken of the entire shroud, ultraviolet fluorescent photographs, raking light photographs, normal front lit photographs, backlit photographs. In addition, dozens of microphotographs were taken of strategically selected areas of the shroud. Sticky tape samples of the surface of the cloth and thread samples were returned to the US for further analysis. Subsequent studies of these samples were conducted using microscopy, pyrolysis mass spectrometry, laser, micro Raman analysis, various methods of microchemical testing. The results of STURP research were published in 20 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles over the 4 years following the team's conclusion of work in Turin. What does the research reveal about the image? No pigment carrier or brush strokes. The image is not due to paint or stain. Dr. Walter Macron, a microscopist, was sent fiber samples gathered using sticky tape on the cloth. He found red ochre pigment and probably in a collagen tempera binder. However, no paint or pigment is found in the areas of the image. No capillarity. The image is not due to soaking up any liquid. It does not fluoresce under UV light. The image is not a scorch from a hot object. No light-sensitive chemicals. The image is not a photograph. The image is not visible in backlighting. When illuminated from behind, the image disappears. Only bloodstains, water stains, and scorch markings are visible. The image is not due to any substance added to the cloth. Each linen fiber contains 100 to 200 flax fibers. One flax fiber is only 15 to 20 microns in diameter. The image is a straw-colored discoloration on the surface of the flax fibers. The discoloration is on the top 1 or 2 fiber layers in a thread. It's found 360 degrees around each discolored fiber. Where the image is darker, greater number of flax fibers are discolored. It's on the surface of the flax fiber only. It does not penetrate the fiber. When a discolored fiber is cut, it's white on the inside. The discoloration is 0.2 microns thick. The image is caused by a chemical change in the flax fibers. There's a change in the carbon atoms that were already in the linen. The carbon atoms were changed from single to double bonds. The history. The shroud is currently housed in the Royal Chapel of the Cathedral of Turin in northern Italy, where it has been since 1578. In 1356, it was exhibited in Lille, France, and declared the true burial cloth of Jesus. 30 years later, in 1389, it was declared a forgery. This is the 1389 memorandum to Pope Clement VII. The local French bishop denounced it as a fake, claiming an unnamed forger confessed to painting the shroud. How does the shroud compare with the crucifixion of Jesus in medieval art? Medievalist.net has 15 examples. When I open the link, notice a non-suffering Christ wearing a tunic, nails in his hands, thumbs visible, no bleeding, no signs of physical agony. This was made 29 years before the French bishop declared the shroud a forgery. And this was made 39 years later. This is how the forger's contemporaries depicted Jesus' crucifixion. How did the forger know to place the nail holes in the wrists, not palms? Delete the thumbs? Place microscopic dirt and abrasions on the nose and one knee? Place invisible serum rings around blood exudate? Have bilirubin and nanoparticles of creatinine and ferritin in the blood? Where did the French forger get Jerusalem pollen and limestone? Why did he sew on a 3-inch strip with a unique first century stitch? How did he make sure the negative image would contain 3D information and body to cloth distance? How did the forger change the electron bonds in the cloth to make the image? The shroud existed 194 years before it was declared a forgery. This illustration is from the oldest surviving text in the Hungarian language. The Hungarian Prayer Codex, dated between 1192 and 1195 AD, has details matching the shroud. No tunic, no thumbs. Herringbone weave of the cloth. 4 holes forming a rough shape of the letter L. Using actors, the National Geographic documentary in the shroud showed how medieval techniques could produce an image on cloth. 1, paint the image on linen. 2, paint the image on glass. Lay linen on top of a painted glass, then place in the sun for 2 weeks. But you need an optically pure sheet of glass, which didn't exist in medieval times. 3, bas relief. Place moistened linen on a statue and dab the linen with pigment. 4, use a body, either a corpse or a live body that you scourge and crucify. Brush it with an unknown substance capable of making an image. Or perhaps Leonardo da Vinci made it using a pinhole camera. However, he was born 100 years after the shroud was documented in the historical record. What kind of image can medieval technology produce? One of these images is the shroud. The other is a reproduction of the shroud made in 2009. Can you tell which is which? On the right is a replica made by Luigi Garicelli, professor of organic chemistry at the University of Pavia. Using only middle-aged materials and techniques, he placed a mask over the face of one of his students, then wrapped a linen sheet flat over the student, rubbed the linen sheet with a pigment containing traces of acid. The pigment was artificially aged in an oven. The cloth was washed. This left a hazy, half-tone image like the shroud. After this, he added bloodstains, burn holes, scorches, and water stains. Based on this, he declared the shroud a fraud. He believes the shroud was first discovered in 1355. Over the centuries, the pigment wore off the cloth. Impurities in the pigment etched an image into the fibers of the cloth, leaving behind the ghostly picture that remains today. Here's what he claimed, quote, "The procedure is very simple. The artist took this sheet and put it over one of his students. His good idea was to wrap the sheet over the person underneath because he didn't want to obtain an image that was too obviously a painting or a drawing. So with this procedure, you get a strange image. Time did the rest." Assuming the shroud is authentic, this map gives one of several possible travel histories for the shroud. 33 AD, the shroud was in Jerusalem. Early Christian tradition, after Pentecost, the disciples sent the shroud with Jesus' disciple Thaddeus to Edessa, a small kingdom in Turkey. Paul's letter to the church in Galatia in Turkey seems to support that they had the shroud. Paul wrote, quote, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified." 544 AD, there was severe flooding in Edessa, and the shroud was discovered in an earthenware jar. 944 AD, the emperor in Constantinople besieged Edessa and took the shroud back to Constantinople. 1204 AD, a special display mechanism was made for the shroud. that would allow the shroud to be raised up to show the face of Christ at an appropriate time during special liturgies. 356 AD, Léry, France, where it was denounced as a fraud. 1453 AD, Chambéry. 1578 AD, Turin, Italy. What made the image? STURP's conclusion after extensive study, quote, there are no chemical or physical methods known which can account for the totality of the image, nor can any combination of physical, chemical, biological, or medical circumstances explain the image adequately. Did this convince anyone that it is the burial cloth of Jesus? Yes, STURP photographer Barry Schwartz, an unbelieving Jew, now believes it is the burial cloth of Jesus. At age 50, based on scientific evidence, he rediscovered his own faith. The evidence brought him back to faith in God. According to Luigi Garashelli, you can make it. Use a specially woven cloth, paint it with pigment, bake it in the oven, add bloodstains and scorching. Time will do the rest. If you Google the Shroud of Turin, you get 12,800,000,000,000 hits. I was unable to read more than a few articles for this presentation. Here are just a few of my resources. To summarize, the shroud is enigmatic. According to the STURP summary, the image cannot be adequately explained. It cannot be reproduced by any technology, modern or medieval. The shroud is consistent with the crucifixion and burial of Jesus, but the shroud has been carbon dated to the Middle Ages. The question remains, who made the image? How?